Welcome to the September 15th regular meeting of the Encinitas Planning Commission. I'm calling us to order at 6:01 p.m. Oh, yeah, it's not Dina. What was? Kathy.
I'm standing in for Dina.
I know you are, but I have such a head for names, which is, it's not my best trade. But Kathy, I see we seem to have all 5 planning commissioners present, and if the record could reflect that. We'd like to start each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, and if you'd join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Anna, do we have any announcements? Any?
We do not.
We start each meeting with oral communications, where anyone wishing to speak on a topic not on tonight's agenda may request to do so by filling out one of these white speaker slips and turning it into our clerk. Comments or questions during oral communications cannot and will not be addressed by the planning commission or staff, but may be referred to appropriate staff. Kathy, do we have any oral communications this evening?
We do not.
We don't. Okay, well, Anna, do we have any changes to the published agenda?
No changes.
All righty, let's move right along. Next up on tonight's agenda, we have the items on our consent calendar. Now, these items are considered non-controversial or routine in nature. All of these items are typically voted on collectively in a single motion without any staff presentation, comment, or deliberation. However, if a member of the public wishes to request a consent item be heard, it will be removed from the consent calendar and given an individual hearing immediately after the consent vote. Now, to pull an item from the consent calendar, you would fill out a pink slip. Is Kathy, anything?
We just have the applicant available for questions.
Okay. Does anyone on the commission wish to pull an item?
I have a question
A question
on the Neptune Avenue residence, the Bluff-top one.
the Newman residence?
On
item
the
16?
plans that were an attachment, it said that in the summary of building square footage, it said that it's existing 7,000 whatever square feet and new 7,000 whatever square feet. So I think there's a small error on that document. It's in the plans that were an attachment.
Oh, we have our
Or
staff-
is there really an existing 7,000 some square foot item on the site?
Todd, is this easily answered, or should we pull this item?
You're just saying on the cover sheet, you noticed that?
I
Yes, in the
didn't know.
summary.
I'm not seeing it.
But there's no existing structure there
Yeah, there's no
today.
existing structure.
It's an
So,
empty lot right now.
so we can state for the record that if that
Yeah.
does say it on the plans, that should be a correction, that there is no existing structure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, if there's no objections, Steve, do you have something?
I'd move to approve the consent calendar.
All right. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Can we call the question, please? Oh, yeah. Before we continue, a friendly amendment, Steve. Item 6C on the minutes was the approval of minutes from August 4th, and Commissioner Prendergast was absent for that meeting. So I think we should note on the record that Commissioner Prendergast will be, is that recuse or abstain from 6C?
That's been noted.
Thank you. So you can vote yea or nay on this, and they will make a note in the record that. Let the record show that the motion passes 5-0, unanimous vote. And if you were here planning to speak on Massage Heights or the Newman residents, you can stick around and watch the show, but you've been approved. Thank you very much. Well, let's see who's sticking around for the Chevron remodel. Bye, everyone. Next up, we have the items on our regular agenda, and tonight we have two items. We have the item 8A, the Chevron remodel, case number multi 3614-2020. The Chevron's located at 805 Birmingham Drive. And this is a public hearing to consider a major use permit, a design review permit, and a coastal development permit to continue the use of an existing legal non-conforming service station with structural modifications including new shade canopy, pumps, tank removal, signage, and the use of a temporary construction trailer. Do we have any disclosures from the commissioners? Hearing none. Wait. Oh, yeah. Fair enough. I didn't visit the site since I used to live right next to it, so I know it very well. But, so I just did a drive-by. I'm going to pass this over to our associate planner, Todd Moreau, for a staff report. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Chairman. As you indicated, the scope of work is related to the Chevron at 805 Birmingham Drive. Includes a major use permit, design review permit, and coastal development permit. To authorize the service gas station with changes to the existing legal non-conforming gas station that's there, including the new shade canopy, pumps, tank removal and replacement, and then other site improvements. And basically, this is the site here, highlighted here in red. You can see just off of Birmingham, it's just east of the freeway, heading into what would be considered East Cardiff across the freeway there. Across the street is the Valero gas station, the hotel, and then we have residences to the east, and then I-5 essentially to the west. And this is just some of the photos of the existing condition today. You can kind of see here on the upper right is Birmingham, and then the entrance to the gas station. There's actually two driveways, the monument signage, the existing canopy, and then down here on the left is the monument sign you can see essentially from the freeway or the off-ramp there. And then this is just looking from the driveway south at the canopy itself, and then you can see the existing market or convenience store they have. Same thing, just bottom right is looking at it from a different angle, looking back westerly, or southwesterly, I should say, at the canopy and then the convenience store. And then just adjacent here is an actual easement where these cars are coming out that is shared to the restaurant there to the south, as well as the storage facility. And this is basically the existing condition. The gas station was built under the county in 1965. The canopy, as you can kind of see outlined here lightly, was added in 1971. The mini mart itself was added in 1981. So all that was done under the county. There wasn't any record of the use permit done under the county, is basically why we're bringing it forward as a use permit today to basically legalize the non-conforming gas station. We do have other permits of record. Basically, a lot of the signage that you see out there was permitted in the early 90s, and then kind of mid-90s, they kind of did the remodel to, I believe, the convenience store, dealing with paint, exterior design, and all that you kind of see out there today. There's also an addition that was done to the convenience store at that time. And just kind of describing the existing condition, you can see the driveway off of Birmingham. This is the shared driveway access that gets you back to the southerly properties. And then the circulation you kind of come in essentially here, either going to the convenience store, utilizing the services, air and water is over here, and then the pumps essentially are under this canopy. And this just is showing the existing convenience store. Really, there's no change to it with this application, but you can just see the existing signage, the layout, the floor plan itself, and how it's laid out. So the proposed condition is basically requesting the major use permit. So essentially, they're deleting or demoing the existing canopy and then moving it westerly to meet the street side yard setback for this easement. And I guess, just to be clear, do we have a caller that came in by chance? Because the applicant's actually on the phone. So I don't know if we want to check to see if he actually...
Yeah.
Is he there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
this is Chris Brown.
Just checking that you were there.
Okay, thanks.
So basically, they want to maintain the existing service station is what we're reviewing at this time. The canopy is being demoed, and we're basically adding a new one. They're going to continue 24-hour service, including gas service, water, air, and convenience store and restrooms. The parking stall configuration is slightly changing, just based on the circulation. And then the existing underground tanks will be removed. There was a phase 1 environmental assessment done, and concluded that everything was fine. And essentially, they'll go through the county protocol to remove those tanks prior to any grading permit. And so this would be the proposed canopy as far as the aesthetics. The height of it is 20 feet. And so canopy signage is basically being reviewed under the use permit. We're basically looking at the linear signage on the canopy itself, which is exceeding, it's basically kind of considered a building. So it's 1 square foot per linear foot of frontage. So there'll be basically the physical signs on there as well as the coloration. So the blue and white coloration that you see on the canopy is considered signage. And so that is, all 4 sides are basically being requested at this time. So that does exceed the 1-to-1 ratio. And so they're requesting that under their use permit. We did cite the Planning Commission interpretation. It's 2007-01 that talked about the use of corporate colors. And basically any coloration like that is considered signage. So they're asking to exceed that with this application. We did cite a couple examples. These ones more or less went through a design review process. But as you can see, the corporate colors were not included in here, so they are more or less white in coloration with the smaller marquee signs on that. And so Chevron's trying to get a little bit more visibility through this process. And then part of that, they did want to illuminate the canopy with LED illumination behind that coloration, and basically dealing with the visibility. And the policy was kind of silent on illumination, just kind of dealt more with the corporate colors. But the visibility, I think, that they're trying to achieve is through traffic coming through the city from, let's say, Orange County coming through down to San Diego that needs the service. So kind of the views looking this way, and then obviously the views going northbound. So you don't quite see it, but the illumination to know that there's an actual service station was kind of what they were after. So basically, staff is asking the Planning Commission to consider the request for canopy illumination. And there is a condition in there to not allow it now. So if you do want to allow it, you would need to, in the motion, include the elimination of that draft condition. Basically, the wall signage they're proposing, you can kind of see it's just the cumulative of the building as well as the canopy. There'll be pump signage on the pumps themselves. And then the monument signs are essentially existing, just I believe they're adding the diesel and the digital font here. But essentially, it's the same, just kind of getting a facelift, so to speak. Parking, basically, will just slightly change. I think it's on the north end here. They're going to slightly change this. There's basically 12 stalls are provided along with 8 underneath the canopy. So that's a total of 20. And then this is basically a surplus of 10 that's required per code. So that's essentially what the use permit's looking at. And then the design review is dealing mainly with the aesthetics of the canopy itself, the construction of the new canopy and the finishes, as well as the creation of the parking stalls and the deletion of the existing stalls. So that basically concludes our presentation. Staff is recommending approval of case 3614-2020, and we're available for questions as well as the applicants on the phone.
Do we have any questions from the commission for staff?
I do have one question. Where is the air and water in the new design, proposed design?
It's right here. It's not moving. It's basically the same location as it is today.
Okay, in the old design, those parking stalls, though, at the top, for the lack of a better word, are there parking stalls there in the original, right now?
No, I think in the aerial it shows, yeah, here you go. See, there's 2 missing right here. So they're adding the 2 into here. But see, there's like a parallel stall that was for the air and water. Basically, you'd pull up to that location and then use that service.
Okay. And so they added 2 parking stalls along that would be on the way to the air and the water?
In this area here. So these 2 stalls are being added.
Okay.
Anyone
I'm just
else?
wondering if air and water have ever been, if there's any examples of air and water being in another position that has more access to bikes or e-bikes. So users don't have to go through and past cars pulling in and out of parking spots in order to use those facilities. Because I think it was mentioned, I think the use of those facilities for bikes was mentioned in the documents that I read.
It is. I mean, so if you look at this picture here, you can see where this is actually somebody filling up right there. But essentially, it was that parallel space. So obviously, that person's pulling forward, but the idea is you'd pull sideways in the actual stall and have that service. So, I mean, that service would be available to anybody, whether it be a bike. It is a Class 3 bike lane. That's what was mentioned. So that does come through Birmingham, heading east and west. So.
I think I'm just talking about it from a safety standpoint.
Sure.
Because of the increase in e-bike usage in the city.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think they're moving it. So I mean, it's just gonna stay that same striped stall. So whether, you wanted, let's say, that striped out, as in not a parking stall, maybe some type of feature or like a crosshatch space, just so anybody can kind of go in there and load. But in theory, that's what it's doing. It's a space to get that service, whether it be a car or anything else.
Okay, so I have another question. Are there any photographs that show the illumination of the canopy that the applicant wants? I didn't see it in the presentation. I'm just wondering if
No,
you come across any.
no. But it's just basically it would be behind the coloration you see here. So it wouldn't be physically visible, it would be behind the illumination. You can kind of see the dash line here. So it's like underneath that top portion.
Okay, so, but it'd be solid illumination across the entire panel?
Like an LED strip, yeah.
Oh, LED strip at the top, or?
No, like underneath, like behind, like it wouldn't be visible to the public eye.
I think my question is, I don't think I'm being clear. It's not just a strip of LED across the top of the entire side, it's the entire panels would be illuminated, correct?
Correct.
Just to clarify that point, so everything we see in blue right now would be backlit and illuminated?
Correct.
Okay. And of the 3 examples that you showed of the other service stations, do any of them have illuminated canopies?
They do not.
Is there an illuminated canopy in the city?
It's a good question. So, yeah.
Is the Valero one on Encinitas Boulevard, is that illuminated?
I don't believe it is, but the Valero is a newer style canopy. So, I mean, it's kind of a question that's being brought up because it ends up being, it's the passerby that maybe can't see the station. So that's kind of why we're bringing it to you. It wasn't really addressed in the corporate colors. As you get outside the city, I think it's pretty obvious. You see a lot of these that are, it's a gas station, where to get service. It has a safety feel to it. So I think that's what Chevron's requesting. You're not obligated by any means to grant that condition, but they are asking for that. And that was kind of the justification, is the visibility to get there.
Or we're not quite up to deliberations yet. Is there
Oh,
any more questions?
yes. What is the height of the existing canopy?
I believe it's 20 feet.
And will this be, and how high is this?
It's essentially the same.
Okay, so it's the same.
Yeah.
Are the station's permits up to date?
As far as the other permits? Yeah. Yeah.
Hazardous materials permits and all the different,
I believe so. And through this process, right, they'll have to go through county environmental health to remove the tanks and be recertified.
can you go back to the survey, please?
Mm-hmm.
So they are going to remove these tanks, and the county will supervise or oversee the removal. Where are the new tanks going?
This is the location here.
Where are the existing tanks?
Essentially, like just in the same general location.
General location?
Yeah.
Okay. Have any neighbors responded?
Nope, we haven't had any.
No one? Let's see. So my understanding is that this is a conforming request because these actually Chevron, the actual Chevron sign is conforming to the current sign code, right?
Which Chevron sign? The
words that say Chevron on the canopy.
on the canopy?
That is conforming to the 50 feet or the 50 square feet based on the lineal square
Sure.
footage. So that is conforming.
Correct.
What's non-conforming to the sign ordinance is the backlit or illumination of the blue strip because it's corporate colors. If that was purple, they could do purple, just hypothetically.
Sure.
They could do purple and we wouldn't have a comment.
Well, you'd have a design review permit
But it's,
in front of
but
you.
it's not, okay, so it's a design review permit, but it's not under the sign ordinance that they're trying to apply under. Because it's corporate colors, it checks off the box, and because it's a Chevron blue, or whatever their color is, we're here to review it, but if it were purple, it would fall under a different category, and we would then talk about backlighting a purple standard.
Yeah. I think-
Yes, so it
yeah.
would be, I'm sorry, this is Anna,
Yep.
just going to chime in. That's correct. The purple would then not be considered corporate colors.
Right.
And then it would be just the same as it is today under the design review regulations and standards that
Okay.
you would review it against. One thing I did want to mention is that there are existing signage today that were permitted that may be considered legal non-conforming as well. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well.
Anna, which ones would be considered legal non-conforming? I'm looking at this picture right now.
So anything that, well, actually, they're tearing it down. So it's a new application, so I would stand corrected on that, actually.
Okay.
Is the lighting, since we're going to get a newer, bigger canopy, I'm assuming, and it's going to be brighter, any idea of how much brighter, since it's a 24-hour station and there are residents nearby? What we're talking about in terms of a percentage, is it going to be 50% brighter? Because its canopy is 50% bigger and the lights are 50% brighter?
I mean, basically, all the lighting is up underneath the canopy, so it's directed down. So there's no visible source. We're talking about the banding, right, which would kind of
Two questions. One is the canopy downlighting. So it
Which
sounds
is
like
shielded.
we're going to increase the size of the canopy, and we're going to probably make the lights under the canopy better, i.e. brighter than what they are now.
right, but they we have a performance standard, so they can't exceed that at the property line.
Okay.
So that'll be shielded,
All right.
So the downlight would essentially meet code. It's the visual of the illuminated banding around the canopy.
And we don't have an example of that in the city, and the applicant didn't supply an example of that in real life, so.
That I don't have, no. Yeah.
I'm done.
Done? Let's see, I'm going to open public testimony. Do we have any speakers tonight, Kathy?
We do. We have one, Mimi Cotter. If you would please come to the lectern.
Come on up. Let's make sure the mic's working first. Do you have a presentation or just talk?
No, just a quick,
It's okay.
quick comment. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Mimi Cotter, and I'm a resident of Cardiff. I'm here tonight to encourage the Planning Committee to consider including the addition of electric vehicle chargers at the remodel project of the Chevron gas station. Under the city's own action plan, increasing the usage of clean vehicles is a key strategy in reducing the city's greenhouse gas emissions. And to support this, the city aims to promote the installation of EV charging stations. Also, as I'm sure you're aware, our city's building ordinances require new buildings and retrofitting large existing commercial buildings to have EV charging infrastructure. Just a few weeks ago, Santa Rosa actually banned the construction of new gas stations in their cities, and multiple municipalities in Los Angeles are also considering similar ordinances. I'm not here tonight to ask you to revoke the permit or to ban construction of new gas stations, but I do believe we have an opportunity to set into motion the transition from our dependency on fossil fuels to an energy infrastructure that is aligned with the transition to electric vehicles. So my question to you all is, why not consider for this project that promotes the future use of fossil fuels to offset that with EV chargers? According to the Boston Consulting Group, 25 to 80% of gas stations will be unprofitable by 2035. So with the business economics in mind, there are numerous benefits, including electric vehicle charging at commercial businesses, including increasing revenue for them and surrounding businesses while people wait to charge. We're also reducing the distance that people have to drive to seek out these chargers, which ultimately reduces energy use. So on the city's own website, there are a number of resources about government incentives that can offset up to 75% of the cost of including these chargers. So my ask to you is consider using this project as a starting point to update the current policy or to implement new policy to require our city's private infrastructure to meet these short and long-term environmental goals. I understand that my recommendation may not come to fruition for this project, but I do hope that you take it in consideration for permit approvals for future projects. As we all know, policies implemented at the local level can sometimes have a great impact on policies at state or even national level. So I, along with my fellow EV drivers, hope that Encinitas can join the pioneering cities to keep up with the transition to EVs and the infrastructure to match that demand. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Cotter. I'm going to close public comment and move into Commissioner deliberations. Oh, yeah, the applicant. Let's go right into there. Is the applicant, I forget because they're on the phone, does the applicant wish to
Yes, I'm
respond?
here. No, I don't have anything to add. The only thing I would say is this is a company-owned Chevron site, so as far as concerns with anything, I mean, they operate their sites much better than franchisees usually do. So
I can't understand him.
I couldn't either.
Yeah, Chris, can you speak up a little
sorry.
bit?
Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that sounds better.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, it's better.
Sorry, I was on my cell phone here. Oh, I just wanted to add that this is a corporate-owned and operated site of Chevron's. So they operate them, to the utmost standard when compared with franchise-type gas stations.
Fair enough. Steve?
I have a question for the applicant. Would they consider putting EV chargers in their project?
I'm not authorized to speak for Chevron and that. I'm sure they would consider it if you wanted them to.
Thanks.
Sure.
Cool. if no one's got any other questions right now, I can leave public comment open so we can ask questions. Bob, go for it.
Do you have an example, since you represent Chevron, of an example where you have backlit this somewhere in North County, San Diego? Or anywhere you have an address you can share with us? So, did you hear me?
Chris, did you hear him?
Yes, I did. And I apologize. I wouldn't be able to share something with you if we were on a Teams call or something. But I did Google illuminated Chevron canopy, and you can pull them up on Google to see what they look like with that illuminated. It's just a light band under the top that illuminates the blue.
What's the address?
As Todd was alluding to.
What was the address, Chris?
Oh, for the Google? I just Googled illuminated Chevron canopy, and it'll come up.
All right.
There'll be many images.
I have a question for, maybe for Anna, while we're waiting for that. When does a requirement for EV kick in? What number of parking spaces?
When it's not new construction, it's alteration of 10,000 square feet or greater is the trigger of when you are required to provide EV charging, and that's 8% of the total parking spaces is the requirement. There are exceptions as well that they can apply for to where there's a lower percentage, but the 10,000 square feet of alteration would be the trigger.
What's the square footage change here?
I believe it was 7,000. Todd could probably give us the exact number, but I believe it was under the 10,000.
Is this considered, I mean, it's a tear down basically of a canopy considered a building, so is that considered new construction then? It sounds like it would be, at least that first one would be triggered.
So that's a good question. This is something that we can look into at when they obtain building permits and make that determination of if it's considered, because this is so new, the requirements, and we've just addressed it, I believe, once, maybe twice in the city so far, that at the building permit we can look into whether or not this would be constitute new construction or alteration.
There were two conditions, Anna. One was 10,000 square feet of new alteration. What was the second one?
If it was 10,000 square feet or greater, then 8% of the parking spaces would need to be EV charging.
Got it. Oh, so if 10,000 square feet or greater were changed, you'd have to 8% of the parking spaces, so.
Correct.
Is there a minimum, so we get a minimum of one?
Yes,
There is a floor?
there are, yes.
Is 7,000 square feet, is that just the canopy? Does that not include the building?
As far as what,
As
the
far as-
canopy wouldn't be the same, it's not interior square footage, so it's just a canopy, it's not enclosed square footage. So the building code would basically address the EV charging station if it's required or not. Yeah.
We ran into a similar situation at the Chevron at Orpheus and Leucadia Boulevard, where the square footage under the canopy was not counted. It's
Yeah.
not a building, it didn't have walls. And it was, yeah, it's a contentious one, or it was then, could be again.
Now, did the Chevron, on the Chevron and Orpheus, did they have a backlit?
They did not.
They did not. To the applicant, is the Chevron station at Leucadia and Orpheus a corporate-owned facility?
That I don't know.
Well, he would know.
I don't know that. No, I don't actually offhand.
It changed hands. I seem to remember there was two brothers who own it. I don't know if they still do or not,
Thank you.
but,
So, real quick, this is, I believe, the LED strip that you see here. This, is that correct, Chris? Can you see the screen? Or you just,
Yeah, but it's kind of delayed, so I'm waiting for it to catch up.
So basically the bigger photo here on the right.
Your mic's not on, Bob.
I just want the applicant to confirm that
Yes,
that
that's
is the
it.
correct.
That's it, right? The larger photo on the right?
Correct image. Yep,
Yeah.
correct. Yep.
So that's essentially what it would look like.
Do we have anything more for questions for the applicant right now? No, let's close public comment. We can always reopen it and move on to commission deliberation. I mean, I looked at this job, I know this area, and I consider the operational characteristics to be, you know, I had no troubles with those. For me, it was all about, a little concerned about lighting the sign, considering we have such a long history of denying other gas stations the same privilege. And I think we'll open up a humongous can of worms. Once we start lighting it, then it's lit all over the place. We also have a very detailed interpretation concerning the colors and how they would turn into signage. Now, I wouldn't want to overturn that interpretation, but I would consider a design review allowance of this particular blue. I can picture other people, again, abusing that, were we to eliminate that interpretation. Again, it's got a long history.
If
But,
If I may speak
Please.
to that, the way staff has interpreted the interpretation
thank you.
is that design review is utilized if they wish to state that the use of, let's say in this case, the blue, is part of the overall site's design and it fits in with the overall design character of, let's say, the main building and the site as a whole, that they would be able to apply for a design review before the planning commission to make that case, in which then you would say, okay, it's not signage.
Okay,
And then under use permits, when you have a use that requires a use permit, you are allowed to exceed signage size. So they're two different things.
okay.
Use permit, you would be allowing the square footage that exceeds the standard. And the design review, in the case of the interpretation, would be that you would agree to an argument that it is not signage in that particular case.
Okay, so sounds like we would have to agree that it is both signage and not signage in order to move forward.
Well, you actually could agree that it's signage and allow it to move forward under the use permit, because use permits allow you to exceed signage size.
Okay, cool, thank you. That's all I got. I'd like to hear what other people have to say.
I'm not really concerned about the interpretation of signage or not signage. I'm concerned about the illumination of it. I would think even if it was corporate colors or purple or whatever, if you backlight it, now it becomes a sign. So I would be inclined not to support the illumination. I would consider, I like the idea of adding EV chargers. I don't know that we have the authority to enforce a business model on someone, but I would say maybe in exchange for illuminated canopy, I'd want to see EV chargers put in place.
So,
Chris?
yeah, as much as I would support EV chargers, I don't know that I would want to make that exchange because of the nature of the neighborhood. Because to the east of the Chevron is residential neighborhood. And it goes up a hill. So I do think that an illuminated sign, the lighting from the sign would affect even more residents than you might think, because of the nature of that land, going up in elevation.
I was picturing driving
freeway?
up the hill and having those LEDs shine in my eyes, even if they're shielded. And it is, it's a beautiful residential neighborhood, and it's like, at that point, the commercial stops. There is no extra commercial further up.
I tend to agree that once we set a precedent, the EV is a great question, and I don't know if that's at our level or the city's level, and maybe the city should revisit the definition of 10,000 square feet, because now we're talking about maybe that's a municipal code issue that the city council has to consider, and I would hope that they would, because this is going to come up again and again and again. And she makes a very good point, that the speaker, regarding our climate action plan and every attempt, and here we are at a fuel station, which may or may not survive the next 20 years based on the way things are going. That's their business risk. But nonetheless, I think we open a can of worms, illuminating one, and we start to domino effect down the line. And I asked the question to be facetious, but not really to be purple, because it opens up a different discussion, sign or no sign. If it's purple and it's backlit, that could be approved because it's purple and not corporate colors. So the code is written that the corporate colors now puts it in a different category, and maybe we should look at that. Anyway, my net is I'm concerned about the illumination. I asked questions regarding the illumination of the facility, and this seems to be adding more light to the facility, to the neighborhood. I understand the corporate decision, but I still think they can get what they want without having, this has been here since, 1965. So I think most people driving up and down the 5 freeway kind of know that between this and the Valero and the Arco on the west side of the freeway, that they could probably get gas at Birmingham. So that's my 2 cents.
Couldn't agree more. Susan?
Yes, I would have to agree with most of what everybody's been saying. My concern about the lighting increase would be for pollinators. Many pollinators migrate at night, and moths are attracted to light. And so bright light is pretty undesirable. In fact, I would wonder if we might, in our code, need to update that at night, lights could be dimmer, to facilitate that. I agree with the comments about EV chargers, that we need to step up to the plate with our climate action plan and do better than we have in the past. I also think this should qualify as new construction, most likely, and that would have cascading effects.
I think I hear a consensus that lighting is not desirable at this time, which kind of leaves the question of the corporate color, the blue canopy with the white. Is that now, Anna, I'm still confused exactly how. So if we say, oh, we actually quite like the blue, which rule are we
Under the
acting there?
Under the use permit,
Okay.
you would simply be approving the signage package as presented minus the illumination under the use permit, which allows you to approve signage that exceeds the minimum standards,
Okay.
maximum standards.
So that's,
So you would just be making a motion to approve the project, and by doing that, you're accepting the signage size.
and we would be accepting the signage package as presented to us, not like if it changes hand to a different.
If it changes hands, they would need to be in substantial, and they wanted to change it, they would either need to be in substantial conformance, and if staff finds it is not, then they would have to come before the planning commission to do a modification to that use permit.
Okay, fair enough, thank you. Yeah, I'm not saying whether I support this or not, I'm just wanted to get clarification there. Who has any thoughts on the blue canopy? Anybody?
No, well, I would argue that the blue color, the corporate color, is signage, because it's identified as Chevron color, especially with the Chevron symbol and the word Chevron. That if someone looks at that blue color around the edge of a gas station in conjunction with those other things, it's signage.
I agree with that, but I don't have a problem with a blue canopy, right? So I have a problem with the illumination. I don't have a problem approving a blue canopy out there.
And I agree with Steve. I don't have a problem with the blue color, but I do have a problem with the illumination.
Okay, do I hear consensus across the board? Who wants to try and button that up as a
Well,
motion?
I was just going to do it as it's written here.
Go for it.
Yeah, I would say the same as Steve.
So I would say adopt the resolution approving the project presented by staff, subject to the condition of no illumination of the canopy.
And I'd second that.
All right. We have a motion and a second on the floor. I think it was Commissioner Dalton who seconded that, was that, or Bob, did you jump in? No, it was Commissioner Dalton was the seconder. Thank you.
Are we voting?
Let the record show that the motion passes unanimously. The crowd wants to move around a little bit, but we'll just move straight on. And I see Jennifer Gates has arrived, and we'll prepare to start with item 8B, which is case number policy number 5199-2022. Thank you, Todd. This is a public hearing to consider an ordinance to add new chapters to Title 24 and Title 30 related to the new Senate Bill SB 9. Are there any disclosures? No? Hearing none? I'm going to pass this directly over to our planning manager, Jennifer Gates. Hi, Jennifer.
Good evening, everybody. So we're here again to talk about SB 9. We've met a few times now this year and to discuss how we wanted to approach SB 9 draft ordinance. And so what I've presented to you is most of the items that we discussed. There's a few that are not incorporated that were brought up. I realized when I went back through the staff report that I meant to put a little bit more about the things that are not incorporated. So I'll just highlight some of those. So just to reiterate, we went, June 29th was the last meeting that we had with a study session to discuss SB 9, the proposed ordinance. And since then, staff's been working on creating this draft ordinance. And at first we had discussed separating it into two different sections. And right now I'm just proposing actually to put it in Title 30 in our zoning code. And there's references to the urban lot split, but not actually modifying our subdivision code section at this time. Some of the items that we discussed, that one that comes to mind specifically that we had discussed that is not incorporated is specific to cool roofs or the white roof that we had talked about. I discussed this with our climate action program manager and about if we had required a cool roof, and that is actually regulated by the Energy Commission, and we would need to do a cost analysis for requiring that if we were to actually require the cool roof. There's some other ideas that I'm still exploring as far as like maybe a point system. So if, put your thinking caps on tonight too, if some of these topics maybe lend themselves to a point system as far as standards that we want to incorporate. I did include pervious surface information in here. I did also include the affordable housing that we had discussed, trying to make it equal. So if you were to put in an urban lot split 4 units on that lot, including ADUs, that one of those would be an affordable unit. So there are a lot of different pieces in here. Also the setbacks that we had discussed about putting a 0 lot line in certain situations. So if we want to, I can go ahead, answer any questions, and then we can dive into any specific sections of the ordinance that you would like to. It is 11 pages long.
It's short and easy. Anybody?
Well, while they're thinking about questions, I just want to say you did a great job incorporating our comments, and I read through it thoroughly, and I was very pleased.
Thank you.
Yeah, and honestly, Jennifer, this was a bit of a masterwork here. You really, if there's anything I thought of, it was like, nope, there it is. I loved the way unit configurations, which is very confusing for so many people, us included. Now we have them here. We know what they are. Parking, the privacy standards was very big. Thank you very much for that. And that one has the upper story that overlook an adjoining property. They have to be pushed back. I mean, it's a hard one to pull together, but I really didn't have anything bad to say. Nothing at all.
Well, it doesn't have to be bad. It could
Not
just
bad. I
be
didn't
a
really have any.
comment.
I mean, the language was just so
Or
spot
anything
on.
that I missed.
You listened to us. Well, I mean, we talked for like however many hours, so you didn't have any choice. But I'm impressed. I could go through this. I mean, we could go page by page and see if anyone has any comments on it. Would that work? I believe the actual draft ordinance starts on page 5 of the staff report. Maybe we can, and anybody have anything on the intro or the start of the definitions? I liked acting in concert with the owner. It's going to be a little hard to prove, but not always. I had nothing on page 5. Anybody? You can, if you want, everyone just like unmute yourself. You can jump in when you need to.
I can scroll down.
Can I ask about acting in concert with the owner, I guess? Basically, we're saying you can't do an urban lot split if the lot next door to you has been split. And what would acting in concert with that owner, is there an example of how, I mean, he's still a separate owner, right? Or that person is a separate owner than you. If your adjacent owner were to say, I'm gonna do an urban lot split, would that constitute acting in concert if you wanted to now to do the same?
No, so that's where the common ownership or control. So let's say that you own majority in Lot A, but then but a portion of Lot B, so you wouldn't be able to do it all. The idea in broad thinking is a developer can't come in and split every single one of his lots up. That's the main idea behind it.
Because he would have common ownership of
All of them.
too. Okay. All right, thank you. My next comment's on page 7, so.
I've got nothing on page 5. Page 6, anybody? Substantial redevelopment, non-conforming lots. You covered all the replacement housing. I lost track of it. Okay.
My comment here is regarding item C about the high fire hazard severity zone. Is this language just straight out of the SB 9 language? Are we saying that if you're in a high fire hazard severity zone, you cannot build a duplex?
No, so in SB 35 is where the language comes from. The second part of this section is a modification to clarify that that we actually have standards in place. So unless existing building standards within those very high fire zones include high fire construction standards adopted or enforced by the city as determined by the building official or the fire marshal. but you cannot modify any of these code requirements. Our city does have very high fire hazard zone fire construction standards. So, I mean, you would know more of what those specifics are, but
Right. So if you were allowed to build a single-family house in a high fire severity zone, you would be allowed to build a duplex.
and you would just need to meet all the construction standards.
I thought, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
I thought when we had this conversation that you could not, based on the R, or whatever, most of Levenhein's in a high fire hazard zone. And the zoning for that at the 2.5 acres is R4? What is the zoning? And I thought that precluded this subdivision.
No, not for high fire zones. They are allowed to have SB9 on them. So as long as they meet the construction standards that are required in those high fire zones, then they are allowed to build.
So the 2.5 acre zoning for a single lot is preempted by SB 9. So everybody out there who has large lots could be putting duplexes on their lots.
As long as they meet the fire standards for their lot. So their construction materials
But there was
and
a matrix, and then we had all the different matrices for all the different zoning codes and where this would be effective and ineffective.
No, the zoning code itself, so the zoning standards, the zoning codes are whether it's allows single family only or not. So that's the first trigger. And so all the zones that allow only single family, SB 9 would apply. So let's say that some of those lots, though, in Levenheim have habitats, ESHA, then no, they would not be able to do.
But if you don't have habitat and you're 2.5 acres, then
You can.
as long as you build to the code. So SB 9 basically trumps everything.
But that also includes street widths and things like that. So it's not just the building construction,
Right.
it's also access.
So then you start to go down the various layers. Gosh, there's no way in or out, and yet we're doubling the amount of people that live there.
Can you, Jennifer, on that point, you mentioned a habitat easement or a open space easement on a property. Does a habitat or open space easement on any portion of your property exclude the entire property then from the lot split? Or is it, if you have the open space easement and you can still achieve the minimum lot dimensions with what you might call the net acreage, right? Are you still eligible to use this provision?
I'm going to defer to the city attorney to see if they've dealt with that specific issue. Currently, we are treating it as if you have a wetland on your property or if you have ESHA on your property, that we would not be able to do SB 9 on that property because it's the parcel as a whole.
That would be my interpretation of it as well. We don't have guidance as far as exactly what that means. There was an Attorney General opinion relating to wildlife and what is habitat, but it's not totally clear exactly at what point that kicks in, but I would agree.
That seems, 2 weeks ago, we talked about a project with a steep hillside. We didn't exclude development on that property because some portion of the property was in a steep hillside. We demarcate which part of the lot is a steep hillside. You say you can't build in there, but we still allow development on the remainder of the lot.
So we would still allow development, but remember that SB 9 is different in the sense that it's basically by right. There's no CEQA. So the idea behind it is, since we have no environmental review with these projects anymore, that they kind of identified all those environmental potential impacts and said these parcels would therefore not be eligible because we do not have CEQA. So it comes out, this is actually duplicative of SB 35, these requirements, these specific ones. And that was the idea behind it. And no historic resources on the site, all those things that normally we would allow development on, but we'd also do studies on it. We would have mitigation measures potentially for any impacts, conditions of approval, all those things. And in this case, we're talking about a ministerial process. And so that's why these types of properties are excluded from SB 9.
Okay.
I could jump ahead to page 8. I mean, again, it's about habitat. Habitat for protected species identified as number I. How is that, how do you know? Is that something like official? Your corner of your lot is marked as a habitat for protected species and that's information is stored somewhere? Or do I say, hey, I saw gnat catchers in your backyard, so, I mean, how is that specified? How would a developer or homeowner know? Or is it one of those, if you have a habitat for protected species somewhere on your property, you know it?
I'll let Anna respond to our overlay that we currently have.
We do have some mapping that is very conceptual that we would start with. And then if there's any indication or if you see any vegetation, then it's typically a site visit. And then on normal properties, we would ask for a biological study. I believe that under SB 9, we would still be able to request something like that to determine whether or not habitat is in fact on or not on your property. So that's the process that staff would take to determine it. So sometimes it's very clear, and then other times we may not know and then ask for a professional to go and do a survey of the site.
Okay. Is that something we should specify here, or will people say, you didn't specify it, so therefore I don't have to do it?
We have areas that we've already identified within our city that do specify that if you're in this specific area, then you do require a study. So that's already in our code. The idea is, in many cases, the habitat for protected species are more like our wetland areas, our areas of native plant species, usually our native habitats, areas that haven't been developed. So we've already have those identified. So I don't know that we necessarily need to repeat that aspect here unless it's something that is maybe not clear. Maybe we can reference the other section of our code that talks about overlays.
But,
All right.
excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I've lived on my street for 15 years, and I don't think I've seen anybody from the city come down and map my site. There's a 10-acre site next door to me that has a 2,000 square foot cottage on it, and the rest is wide open. So if the maps aren't up to date and someone makes an application, then they're relying on the city maps, and the city maps might be stale. So I think somehow we should have either an up-to-date map or a period of time of when if the map hasn't been updated, that the applicant has to provide a biological study.
I have a couple questions too. So my neighbor has a plaque that they put up that says that they have a protected, I don't know what the wording is for monarch butterflies. Like they got some kind of special certification that says they're protected habitat for a monarch butterfly. Now, I don't know if that's a protected species in any way or not, but can people go out, they've applied for that. So now, is that something the city then recognizes as people go and apply to some organization to become a protected habitat for something like that? And how would that affect this? And then also, to Bob's point, he's got a 10-acre place next door. Let's say they want to do an urban lot split. And he said, can another member of the public, not the property owner, come to the city and say, I want a review done of that property to see if they are a protected habitat?
Yeah, because I see the goal is to be able to know beforehand. It should be obvious to all.
Right, and if you're relying on a map that might not be updated, then you're relying on false data. And not every site, you have to know if the base information is correct to make a decision. And if you don't have, your decision is flawed if you don't have the base information. It's my opinion. So, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that to Jennifer's point, within our municipal code, we do have the right currently to request studies to determine if there's habitat on the site. For example, if we have our special study overlay, that's kind of a blanket of there may be something on this property. And so that gives us as staff to say, we would like a biological study to determine. And it could be a biological letter, maybe from a professional. So I believe we do have that right today, as Jennifer mentioned, to make that request to determine if they qualify or not qualify under this.
So the applicant would be required.
Yes, I don't know if, maybe we can, that's something that we can just kind of triple confirm, but that is my understanding that we are able to do that.
But what happens in this instance where the city doesn't do that? For some reason, it doesn't come to mind, it's not flagged in any particular way. But yet there is a protected habitat.
Right.
Can another member of the public call the city and say, hey, I would like a study done to find out if this is protected habitat, I have concerns?
A member of the public is absolutely able to contact the city to see if a study is warranted, yes.
They would know that there was an application because they'd be notified.
The notification requirements, so SB 9 is ministerial.
So they're not notified.
Not
Just
till the
want
end of
to
the
post a
project.
permit out in front of their house or their lot.
Okay,
I've
so,
seen
Would
at least
it be
one of
too
those.
late by then, though? The permit's already been granted and it's posted.
Mm-hmm.
The posting comes before the permit, like a notice of
mean-
permit pending.
But could then the process be, the process to determine if it's a wetland or some other protected habitat happen after the posting of the permit, the application for permit?
Looks like they're discussing that. Jennifer, while they're talking, is there an expedited process that this needs to have? Does this have to be like approved within X amount of months? Like a lot of the state laws insist on something like that.
It does need to follow our Permit Streamlining Act of 30-day reviews. Doesn't need to be approved within 30 days, but it does need to be reviewed within 30 days.
So we would have time to make these evaluations. We wouldn't have got to approve it in 60 days or else.
Correct.
Excellent.
but if it's ministerial, does it even come to us?
No.
Right, so.
Yeah, it wouldn't come to us, but still, it's like the ordinance is what's going to govern how staff handles these cases. I would prefer a trigger for the habitat. It's within this map. Because right now, it's very subjective. Somebody looks at it and says, ooh, that looks habitat-y, or they don't, depending on their mood of the day.
Would you require that of all houses then? I mean, it seems like you can't burden an SB 9 property or project with an added level of review or documentation that you didn't require of every house. I think the state law is intended to simplify the process as if it was a single-family house. We don't ask this of a single-family house.
Agreed. However, if one were to drive out through Levenheim and see the large open spaces, there's probably a better chance of habitat issues than, say, Village Park. So, or, if you're in Cardiff and you're along the lagoon and there's a lot of wildlife there, that is now a spillover effect. That's one of the benefits of having an updated lagoon, and maybe the Cardiff houses have to do it. So I think sometimes the state rules don't take into consideration some of the unique nuances of a community like Encinitas or Levenheim, or people living along the lagoon that might have endangered species coming through on the flyway. That's the whole point. And all I'm suggesting is, within the state guidelines, is we have some sort of trigger. And if all the person has to do in Village Park, it says we're nowhere near a wildlife area, or we're nowhere near a wetlands area, then maybe that box can be checked. But if you go out to a Liebenhain and you see 10, 15 acre parcels and you're out there next to Elfin Forest, then
Yeah,
I've got mountain lions in my backyard. I've got bobcats in my backyard. I've got photos from my critter cam. I think other people in the neighborhoods do also. So to me, it's unique to the location, and but that's part of Encinitas. So I think it's important somehow that there be a trigger, and even though the state law says it's ministerial, I think we're talking about just taking the extra step.
Yeah. I'll share with you that my friend in Alpha El Camino Real has a mountain lion on his video as well. So it's throughout the
good.
city.
This is
right?
good.
But it seems to me that the state does, I mean, those areas are exempt, there's the provision in here that says habitat, I think you're questioning whether the city maintains up-to-date information about habitat. Because all of this is mapped, right?
Correct.
You get a property and you look at your due diligence and you say, hey, I'm in the high fire hazard severity zone and I'm in a wetlands, and you come up with your list.
Yes.
I guess you're questioning how valid is that list of, how often is the map updated?
Sure, it might be 20 years stale, and there's been a lot of changes in the community since 20 years since the map was updated. And if that's the point, then you're relying on false data to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. But then again, everybody is, right?
I hope not.
The single-family house is doing
You
this.
pulling up my house?
What's that?
I said, looks like you're pulling up my house.
Oh, did I? Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know where you live. I'm sorry.
Hey, you brought it up, Bob.
I understand, and I'm on public record of where I live.
I don't know where there is, but I don't know it.
I guess, Commissioner Dalton, I'm just trying to, based on my community, based on some of the factors that are involved, that somehow the process, while it's ministerial, have a check, and making sure that that is reviewed, and maybe just make it part of the process that the planning department has to do before it's too late, before the sign goes up and before it's approved. Because there might be reasons why it can't be approved. More so here in Liebenhain maybe than in other locations.
Yeah.
I'd see, as it's written, if it's, because I mean, the start of this little section says, not permitted on a parcel that is any of the following, as identified, blah, 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 or as amended. And so if you're found to have, your 10-acre lot in Liebenhain has a habitat for protected species, then no SB 9 for you. And I think that would apply to vast hunks of Liebenhain, and probably good portions of Leucadia as well.
Right. I guess the flip side is if I'm happen to be right on the other side of the street and the line is down the middle of the street, who's to say that the butterfly doesn't cross the street? So, they drew the line 20 years ago across the street. And that, where does that extend? And what you're telling me is, like, if you're in the boundary, then you have an exemption. If you're outside the boundary, you don't. So maybe everybody's going to come in and lobby to be inside the boundary.
And I mean,
We are a city, right? At some point, you have to establish where urbanism and development can happen.
Yeah.
Right?
This also begs the question related to Bob's point about should portions of it, it's like, well, your 10-acre lot and this acre over here is obviously a habitat for protected. It's a creek bed, there's animals going through there, but, is the other 9 acres able to be split or not?
Right.
I mean, as it's written right now, the answer would be no.
Right. But the one across the street could be.
And is that an intent we want to put into this? Right now, it's rather restrictive. We don't have a lot of SB 9 lot splits, but theoretically, every lot in California could split.
Right.
So this is from the state law. This specific section is from the state law.
Okay.
In SB 9, it says that all of these, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Unless, and then the only ones that are potential are the floodways and the very high fire areas, because they have specific building standards that are applicable that allow development within those. And it's only if your city or jurisdiction actually has that capability. So ours does, and so you can build within those specific areas. But we'll double check and look at what the triggers for the biology study is within our code. The majority of the city is in some kind of special study overlay. So we will look to see specifically what the biology trigger is in our specific code, because this isn't the final. This is my first draft, knowing that you guys usually do some wordsmithing anyways. And so we'll do the October 6th, I'll come back with the answers to your questions and that final draft.
And Bob, to your point, I think, like we saw with the historic tree on Melba recently, right? I would think anybody would be able to question the current validity of, say, this overlay, right? If you felt the 10 acres next to you was indeed a habitat, but it wasn't marked as habitat, you could go to the environmental subcommittee and say, I petition that this should be considered a habitat and get it put into it.
There's no doubt that the next Levenheim Town Council will probably have some conversation about the current mapping and where people's parcels lie within the map as it relates to SB 9.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's, all these things are all kind of welling up as we kind of weed through it all, and I think things like this are little triggers that we can do as citizens in our communities versus maybe what the state legislature is doing, and work within those guidelines.
And the Levenheim Town Council is very active here and could probably provide guidance.
Yes.
That's something that the city could potentially incorporate into our rules.
Hope so.
So the case that the Attorney General, well, it's not a case, but the Attorney General's opined on that our Assistant City Attorney is talking about is up in Northern California, and they identified their entire town as a habitat area.
Oh, yeah. Was that
So-
for bobcats, I
It was
believe?
Yeah.
Mountain Lion, and I think it was
Mountain
Mountain
Lions.
View or Atherton, one of them.
Yeah, so the analysis in that particular situation, and you're correct, it was the town of Woodside. And the Attorney General, and in my view, correctly interpreted the law as saying, no, it's actually habitat. It's not areas where mountain lions walk through. Rather, it's areas where they eat food. You know, it's places where there is the habitat. They actually reside there, as opposed to, yeah, we know that they walk through your backyard, but that doesn't mean your backyard is the stuff that they eat. So, you know, essentially they said it's true habitat. When we think of habitat, it doesn't mean streets with sidewalks.
So you're saying that just because monarchs fly through my yard, it's not a habitat?
Correct, that it needs to.
Whereas if I go up to Pismo Beach and the thick in the trees, that's a habitat.
Correct. And then, as Jennifer did point out, that language in our ordinance is direct quote from state law. So the questions that you're raising are essentially how to implement that. And I think those are worthwhile questions, and we'll bring that back.
So I just have a clarification question regarding the 10 acres where 1 acre might be habitat. Is that also state law that the entire 10 acres then is not subject to SB 9, or is that one of the things
Under a common owner?
we're going to be working on?
So we can always be more permissive than state law mandates. So state law says if the parcel needs to not meet any of these requirements. Well, if it's got habitat on it, then the entire parcel doesn't meet the requirement, right? Maybe a portion of it. So we could allow it if we wish to. That's certainly our prerogative. So if we wish to say, well, you know, we will allow it on this portion of it, but not on that portion of it, or there needs to be a setback from the habitat, whatever you want to do, you know, you can be more permissive, I guess is my point.
Personally, I feel this is such a new and untried law that I would not lean towards being even more permissive than the state allowed. But I could move on from,
I could too.
we stalled on page 8. Steve, you got something here?
Not until on page 9, I don't think. Which is the next page. Item 6 on page 9 says, 2-unit residential development shall be subject to paying development impact fees. Do they get a credit? If you have a house that you tear down and build a second, and then you build a duplex, do you get credit for the house that you removed?
No.
Feels like you should.
Yeah, we actually have done that. So you would only be paying the fees for the new unit that you
The increase
develop.
in units.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the increase in the square footage you would pay for?
For
'Cause-
residential, I know it was, the experiences I have had was simply the units. But the square footage, if it's changed to square footage, then it would possibly be the change in it, yes.
I presume that there's different development impact fees depending on, typically you have any number of different types of development impact fees. So you might have a park impact fee or a drainage fee or whatever, and each one of those fees is going to have its own calculation. So whatever that calculation is, we're treating it like a new unit, and you need to pay like a new unit.
Right, but often it involves a removal of a unit. You should, like schools, right, will say, what's the net increase in square footage? Not, we're not going to charge you for the
That is
800 you
that
already
is
had.
typically how it's done. I haven't read our particular ordinance and our particular fees, but I agree that that is typically how it is accomplished.
Okay. So the bottom line, the intent of item 6 is not to alter the way development impact fees are assessed. It's just saying that these are subject to it.
Correct.
And
It's just to clarify that you will be paying fees.
Yes. At the bottom of page 9, item A, I think describes a lot that you do not do an urban lot split, and we end the paragraph with saying you would get up to 4 units, right? A duplex and essentially an ADU per primary dwelling unit. And then B is describing scenarios when you do an urban lot split. And then B has 2 subcategories, 1 and 2. Item 2 there, I guess, says, should a resulting parcel include only 1 housing development unit, either 1 accessory dwelling or 1 junior ADU, meeting the requirements is permitted. Are we switching terminology up above? We're using primary unit is the determining thing. We've established some sort of ratio, right? You get 1 ADU per primary dwelling unit. But in item 2, I feel like we switched to referring to 1 housing development unit. Is that a primary dwelling unit?
It's primary. Sorry, I was trying to catch everywhere I was.
And do we need this section if we at some point just said it's 1 ADU per primary dwelling unit?
But it was just to clarify that even if you did do an urban lot split, you could still just do 1 house on that lot if you so choose to do that. It was just to clarify.
Okay.
Meaning you don't have to do them at the same time. You could get the split.
And just do 1 house.
Do one house.
And if I can, this is also clarifying that if you are doing urban lot split and 2-unit development, that now you are restricted to either an accessory or a junior. As opposed to if you came in and you were not an urban lot split, but you were just 2-unit development, you would be able to do an accessory dwelling unit and junior.
I see.
That's correct.
Good call.
If you did an urban lot split, built only 1 primary dwelling unit on one of the lots, would you only get an ADU or junior ADU? Or would you get both because you only did one unit?
So we were saying that you could do the one, because you did the urban lot split.
Right.
Because we only have to allow up to 4 units total. And we were being more permissive, per direction from city council from the first meeting, more permissive in the sense that we were allowing up to 4 units on just one lot. And so let's say they did the urban lot split, I think we were saying that they could do 4. So if somebody wanted to come in and actually do another unit on that lot, they could.
So under the urban lot split, the maximum units would only be 6, not 8. Because we're saying you only get an ADU or junior ADU.
If you
but
do
not
a
both,
single family, if you just do
If you
the
do
one
it
single family.
per primary dwelling in a lot.
But I see what you're saying.
But still, if you do an urban lot split and you do 2 primary units on each of those, each gets.
Yeah, I'm not questioning really.
Still turns
the-
into 8
the,
units.
I think we were trying to just clarify that you get 1 ADU per 1 primary unit. When you do the urban lot split, that may limit you on that one lot.
Right. I don't I'm not questioning that, the ratio, but I just do think that maybe item 2 implies that there's a third scenario here, and really all we're doing is restating the proportional, the 1 per primary dwelling. And maybe it's adding confusion because at least I'm looking for what's the distinction between item 2 and item 1.
Okay.
Can I try to, I see where you're going with this, and the first option is telling you that when you have a 2-unit development, the primary unit on each of those lots that were split under urban lot split can have either a junior or an accessory for a total of 6, like you mentioned. But it's clarifying in my eyes, the number 2, that even if you are only doing 1 unit on this urban lot split, you still are only allowed either an accessory unit or a junior accessory. So it doesn't have to mean that just because you're doing 2-unit development. It's still because you are an urban lot split. Even if it's just 1 single home, we're not going to allow the junior and accessory as a single-family home would allow typically.
Right. Item 1 says either 1 accessory dwelling unit or junior ADU dwelling unit per primary unit is permitted, right? So it's quiet on whether you're building a duplex or a single family. It's just saying 1 per primary. So you would get an additional ADU for each unit.
For each unit.
Well, and I don't want to
I-
belabor it. I think we're all, I'm saying is, I think item number 1 covers establishes what the ratio of ADUs.
So
to-
the only difference between those 2 is in that second sentence of 1. So the proposed accessory dwelling units would not be subject to the minimum floor area requirement that's identified in section 304840. The minimum floor area requirement is that an ADU is 800 square feet, automatically allowed. And we're saying that that's not applicable, that we don't have to allow an 800 square foot ADU if it does not fit within the actual underlying zoning standards, because we are being more permissive in allowing more development unit-wise on the site. We're still wanting them to meet lot coverage requirements. So it may be a smaller ADU in that case.
Would that apply even more, though, if you were building a duplex? That's where we're saying you're not.
So, yeah, so you're getting, so you get 1 and 1, right? So you definitely get your 2 units, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna get ADUs. If your lot's not big enough to allow ADUs, you're not gonna get them.
Yeah, but that section 30.48.40,
Is our ADU section.
yeah, but it's referenced in both of those items.
Right.
Like if you eliminated item 2, you would still have reference to that code section about ADU size.
But I would
coverage.
allow the 800 minimum. That was my only distinction between those 2 in that sentence, is that it's not subject to the minimum floor area, and I do not make that distinction
Okay. I think we've
Okay.
beat this up. I'll leave my comments as they are.
It's good because I wasn't thinking of the duplex component. I just wasn't, one was one, not 1 equals 2. Or for that matter, even 3. You know, you could split them, make it a condo, and each one of them is a primary dwelling unit, and then each one of those is going to get, assuming it meets the standards of the 800 square feet. Yeah. So that, you know, it multiplies quickly.
Mm-hmm.
In item B, is this from our discussion last time, that if you do 4 units, right, this would be a duplex and 2 ADUs,
Yeah.
you're
Scroll a little bit, Jennifer. We can.
you're required one of the dwelling units will be set aside as affordable. And is that out of the state law, or is that something that we've added?
That's something that, based on the discussion to explore today, based on our discussion the last time, was to explore what we could do for an affordable housing requirement if somebody was maximizing those 4 units on a lot. Basically 2 primaries and the 2 accessories. So what I was talking about, that this development, it shall not be permitted to pay in lieu fee. So currently in our inclusionary ordinance, all housing development now is required to pay in lieu fees, or you can provide a unit. That's your option. And so what I'm proposing here is that one of the 2 accessory dwelling units, when you do a total of 4 dwelling units on a lot, that one of those would be affordable and would satisfy your inclusionary requirement, and you would not be paying in lieu fees.
And that would be regardless of whether it was an urban lot split. So if they did an urban lot split, each one of them would have an
Well,
affordable unit.
No, actually, ironically, if you did an urban lot split, you could build 6 units, but that none of them would be required to be set aside for affordable.
Well,
But if
one
you
would on
do-
the 4, because you're doing 2 lots now?
Yes, if you do an urban lot split, you're only allowed to do 1 ADU, right? So we've already said you'd only get.
You can do 2.
Well, if you look at the urban lot split, you have 2 separate lots. You don't have to develop them all at the same time, do you? Could you do 1 lot with 3 units?
That's now a requirement, is that you have to do, if you do an urban lot split, you need to propose your development as well at the same time.
If I can clarify, I'm following a little bit of what you're saying, is the urban lot split occurs, and you have to come in now with your 4 units, and if they were to do an accessory unit for each primary on each lot, this provision would still apply, that one of those accessory dwelling units would have to be affordable.
Right, because we now have 4 units, and now because you submitted it all at once, and so now.
So it's not just on a single lot. I think that's what you were.
I guess I was
making.
thinking that in some ways, if you did not split your lot and built 4 units, you're going to be held to some affordable set aside. But if you split your lot and build 2 projects with 3 units each, you would not be held to the same standard.
Would you-
Correct. You'd be paying the in lieu fee.
So you would not have to set aside
Affordable.
one of the ADUs as affordable, okay.
Maybe that's something we can clarify, Jennifer. To one of the comments that I think I heard was that if you're doing an urban lot split, you have to come in with your development of the units. So you'd have to let us know at that point there if it's going to be 2-unit development on each.
It's farther down.
Okay.
And,
So with this though, do you want to, so right now it's written as on one single lot, so regardless if you do an urban lot split and have 2 lots, or just keep it as 1 lot, it is written if you do 2 primaries and 2 ADUs, that one of those ADUs would be affordable. Do you want it in the case when there's no urban lot split, or do you want it only when they do an urban lot split and now have potentially 4 on 1 lot?
I'm sure everybody has input on that. I personally don't think I wouldn't want to restrict it to affordable, because I think the very nature that these units are getting, you haven't increased the lot sizes. You've just you've diminished the size of the unit. So I think there's a natural affordability that happens when you only build a 600 square foot unit. You just can't rent it for that much money. So
But don't we already have that in our inclusionary policy? So that when you trigger it, when you're over 7 units? Isn't that just part of what we already have as code?
ADUs do not count towards density, so they are not, they actually do not count towards the inclusionary requirement themselves.
And I think it would be important to be consistent with how you handle ADUs. Like if they're not density, right, they're not units in some provisions, it seems maybe inconsistent to come back later and say, but in this situation, they are considered units, and therefore we're going to apply, affordable
Yeah, I think,
restrictions to them.
so with the urban lot split, I think when we initially talked about it was more towards the urban lot split situation. So according to state law, the jurisdictions only have to allow 4 units total, so 4 primary units, and the direction from city council was to allow ADUs if it fits within the standards that are in that underlying zoning. And so in some cases, in our larger lots, that is possible. We could potentially have 4 units on each lot, so therefore 8, where previously we would have been able to only have a single-family home and an ADU and a junior ADU, so 3. And I think that was what the question is, and I think that we've talked about a little bit about affordability by design, or do we want to ensure affordability for low income?
It's a great question, but the intent of SB 9 in some ways is to.
Personally, I would be in favor of ensuring affordability by putting it as our policy.
I would agree. I think the intent to allow the splits is to try to, they're basically jamming affordability by allowing people to split these lots on an urban, and for us to just give people the ability. I understand the property rights issue, and you have options, and clearly there's an in lieu, and you don't have to do it. But part of what we're facing with is all this, we're short units. We end up with Clark Street projects. We end up with other projects to accommodate our requirement for the state. So to me, you're getting the benefit of the split, you're getting the benefit of the units. Why not get the city the benefit of? I understand it's an economic impact to the property owner, but I also think that these laws allow the property owner to benefit economically by having multiple units on the lot that heretofore, pre-SB 9, they did not. So yeah, I get it. You can also pay the fees, but the whole thing here is you're getting all this density because the state, and the intent of that is affordability, so.
Yeah,
It's a private property issue versus, some of the mandates. If you don't want to do it, then don't split your lot and don't build.
I think increasing the supply of housing is naturally bringing the cost down. But, this is not to discuss, approve it today or not. But that's where I come from, is I think it's naturally bringing rents down if the unit sizes are smaller, and you've obviously increased the supply of housing substantially under this.
I would look at downtown rents and look at the cost of rent in a unit for the same square footage 10 years ago versus today. And I'd argue that there's more units than there were 10 years ago today, but the rents are higher. So there's more units and rents are still going up. So that's why ensuring the affordability is an important component of the conversation. That's all.
I feel similarly. I think, we are, these extra 4 units are basically bonus units that the state does not insist we have, but we're allowing them, a lot of units. And it doesn't feel bad to insist on affordability for a portion of them. If you don't want to do that, then don't do that, or build the 3 units and pay the in lieu fee. I had a question now, Jennifer, something you brought up, where when you do the SB9 split, you're supposed to say what you're going to build there. I imagine a lot of people are thinking, oh, this is great, I'm going to do an SB9 lot split. I'll split my lot and I'll sell off that worthless lot that I could never figure out what to do with. Is that no longer an option, or is that, what's the law on that?
It's not a law.
Or, I mean, what's,
It's something I wrote.
okay. Well, yeah, sometimes you write laws, Jennifer.
Well, I mean, it's not state law.
But, so I'm picturing one of my near neighbors. I saw an SB9 permit application thing posted up there, and I know this lot. It's kind of house on one side, and the other half is a kind of a flattish, empty lot that's hard to build on because it's got a power line going across it. And, you know, I know that the guy who used to own it was a friend of mine, and he was like, oh, I wish I could split this stupid lot. And I kind of got the impression that's what the new owner is planning. I don't think they want to develop something, but they'd love to maybe partner with somebody who would develop it. Is that what SB9 does, or is it, it's like, let's say that was my lot and I was going to split it. Would I be obligated to design and be prepared to build whatever's going on that lot?
That's
before
what we're now asking for. That's what I'm proposing currently in the ordinance, is that at the time of the urban lot split, that we are getting those proposals. Because a lot of the ordinance components are specific to, if you're doing 2-unit development with an urban lot split, then these things are applying to you. So we kind of need to know, with your urban lot split, what's your plans? Are we doing 2 units with 2 accessory? Are we only doing 1 single-family home? And then also on top of that, with each of these developments, the covenant, you know, all the deed restrictions that go into place with SB9 and with these developments, the limitations on rent, et cetera. You know, some of the discussions have occurred about, okay, how do we make sure that the improvements get made? So we're going to do an urban lot split. We're going to create this lot behind this other lot that would then potentially, are they going to have 4 units? So then their driveway needs to be 20 feet? Or are they going to do 2, and then their driveway only has to be 16? I'm going to get it wrong. But those types of things that always go into place when we start talking about when you construct, and the easement that's then therefore going to be required for access. And there's a lot of components that are going to go into an urban lot split when we are allowing, because we already allow these configurations in our city. We already allow flag lots and things like that. So some jurisdictions are saying you can only split in half. And so that you only have, that you're split your lot and you have your frontage. You can't have a lot behind your other lot, which we already do in the city all over. We've allowed flag lots, and we continue to have allowed those. So there's just a lot of details, and we believe that this would just make it easier on everybody if all the rules were kind of there.
I kind of agree with where Kevin was going with that, though. Economics change. You build a house, you know, maybe you plan to build a duplex there, maybe you can't. But I think even beyond that, we think of this in terms of a developer coming in. But one of the first ways I could afford to live in Cardiff is to buy a lot in Cardiff and tear down the house and build a twin home. So the idea of separating off a lot, if it allowed someone to afford to live in Encinitas, they could buy a property and, you know, subdivide it and maybe sell the other property. Now they don't really control what that other person wants to put on their duplex or a single primary unit. But I feel like we're eliminating, you're kind of ensuring that only the people with the economic horsepower to develop 6 units at a time or 8 units at a time can come afford to do it all together. And I think there's just single homeowners that would benefit from being able to, you know, sell a lot and use that money to offset the cost that, you know, to buy into Encinitas if that's what they're trying to do.
So I would have a question related to that, though. So if property owner was allowed to do an urban lot split and then sell the other half, then is that new owner going to be restricted by SB 9?
They should
So
be.
the owner would go into the new ownership. The person who buys it would have deed restrictions already.
That's already in here, I think, where it says if this lot was created under SB 9 provisions, all these still apply. As it relates to, I agree with you, Jennifer, that there's all sorts of details about the width of the driveway and all that, but that kind of becomes incumbent on the person splitting the lot. If they go ahead and build a 16-foot driveway, when they go to sell that lot behind them, they've diminished the value of that lot in a way, because that lot would only be able to build the 2 units instead of, the 3 or, something more. But that's just natural selection or capitalism in there that, or they have to go redo the driveway. Like, it may not be the cleanest way for the homeowner, but we're talking about, giving them maximum flexibility.
I think we are also concerned about utility access and, all those other
Yeah.
components below the ground to the
It's-
site
it's,
and trying to.
The county used to auction off delinquent sites, right? And a friend of mine bought one of those, and we were all, oh, you got such a great deal, it was so cheap. It turns out there's no fire access, there was no electricity,
Yeah.
there's all sorts of
Exactly.
things that come into play, and that would be, the person doing the lot split would have to make sure that they did it right, or they just created a basically worthless lot. They can still own it and put a yard in it,
So,
right?
well,
But-
so it depends, because that's what a lot of people in Laguna Beach, there's a whole development that has no road access, and people sell those lots all the time, and people will come in to develop, and there's no roads.
Yeah.
And so you can't do anything. Well, can I put a garden on it? No, you actually literally cannot do anything on that lot. So I think what we're trying to do is, we've had different instances of different projects coming forward, and I think we're trying to make it as clean as possible, because this, as we know, is new and it's crazy and interesting all the same time. So whichever way that you guys want to do it, I'm happy to strike
You're
it.
basically
Or
saying, if you mess up, shame on you. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. If you're buying that site and you're limited, well then, guess what? You're limited. If you are you're a bad quote developer and you put a bad lot split together, well then, shame on you. Tough on you. To your point.
I think I am saying that, but I'm saying it maybe in a relation to thinking that I'm thinking about the entry-level house for my son or my children, that as they mature, they want to buy their starter home in Encinitas or something. And one of the mechanisms allowing that to happen is if they can, hey, it's got an acre of land and I'd be perfectly happy to live on half an acre. Right? Let them sell off a half an acre lot.
But you're saying to your son, well, if you mess up the lot split and you didn't.
Well,
you didn't leave room for the utilities, well, then your
That's on
property
you.
that's on you.
I mean, there are qualified civil engineers and architects and, people that will come in and help you, guide you through that lot split. The lot split itself has to go through an engineer, the surveyor,
Right.
in order to record it. So I just would like to see that available to, call them the common Joe, the person trying to get a foot into the housing market in Encinitas, and not the developer that is ready to do 8 units at a time.
There's already the option of only building 6 instead of 8. I think that we need to move off of this and on, or we're going to be on this one point all night.
It's a good point.
But it's such an important point to make, is, Steve, I think you really nailed it here. It opens it up to everybody. There's a lot of people who have a lot, have fixed income, would love to sell off half of that lot, and there's lots of developers who would love to get their hands on an encumbered SB 9 lot and would make, good business from it. And the city would have its goals met, or the state would have its goals met, more housing would be created. The homeowner who, doesn't need to have a lot of money. It's like, need to know how to develop a duplex and go through all that. I think this should be allowable, and I think that the staff will be reviewing this permit and might say like, hey, there's no road access here, or something like that.
Or not.
Or
You
not.
just say-
I would like to think our staff is usually pretty vigilant about making sure people don't do anything obviously brain dead stupid. But it could happen. You could insist, no, I've got to be able to split this somehow or another. Drones will fly me out there.
We will require, there's another requirement in here for an access easement.
Yeah.
It was just an example of
Yeah, all
fun.
lots have to have,
Yeah.
access to a right-of-way, but I think we focus often on the 6 and 8, like what the bad side of all of this could be, but there is this one, maybe you want to split it, and maybe someone just wants to build a single house, and that's the way they get.
Yeah, maybe they want to give it to their kid, and their kid can build a house sometime in the future when they know how they've got enough money to build a house.
Right.
You could, I think this is a situation that's going to crop up much more frequently. I mean, if we limit this to developable plans, we're going to have nothing but developers doing this.
That's what I was going to say too, because then that really limits the people who can do the urban lot split, because they don't have the resources to put forth all of those plans.
And if I can add to, we have one SB9 in-house, and it's doing an urban lot split, and then you have a structure that's being built on the front home. Well, you can see that if they were to do additional units on the other lot in the future, that where they're building that existing home, you may not be able to get access, and you don't know what's going to happen. Let's say it's a longer driveway down the road. And so staff tries to, as much as possible, to inform applicants when we notice and see something like that. But you're absolutely right. There may be cases where we would approve something, and then somebody comes for a 2-unit development down the road, and then we have to say no to it because it doesn't meet the, utilities or fire access. So we will learn as we go.
Yep. When I was shopping for houses here, my wife and I, this is after the crash, and nothing was on the market because everyone was waiting for the prices to go back up. And all we saw was flawed houses. They're the only ones to hit the market. And one in particular was on a really good-sized lot. It was right in the neighborhood we wanted to be. It was a long, horizontal house that kind of went almost lot line to lot line as close as they could. And there was no way to get to the back, even if we wanted to. You'd have to tear down part of the house if you wanted to get a backhoe back there. And we scratched our heads and says, "Oh my God, what are people thinking?" Obviously, somebody back in the day wasn't thinking at all. That's where they wanted their house. So you're still allowed to do stupid things. I could move on from this. I feel now,
I could too.
Jennifer, I feel we're all seem to have good consensus that we'd love to see people be able to split lots without.
I struck it.
My next question is about item 4 on page 11. It's referring to height. And I think it's the last sentence says, "In no case shall a building exceed the height of the underlying zone to allow the development of 2 800-square-foot units when it is feasible to modify other development standards to allow the development." Can I infer that you can exceed the height limit if you can demonstrate that you can not, there's no other development standard to deviate from? Like, if it's infeasible to alter the other development standards, then you could exceed the height limit. Is that?
When it's infeasible, let's say lot coverage or other types, from our last meeting, it sounded like height was the most concerning to.
But it's kind of the last line of defense.
Yeah, last line.
The height is the last thing you deviate from, but we're accepting that eventually someone may come in and try to deviate from the height. Okay.
So on that, Steve, or Commissioner, so modify other development standards, do we have to list what standards they can qualify for before they can exceed the height limit?
I see where you're going. I don't think, I
pretty
think the whole
vague.
chapter is labeled development standards,
Okay.
right? So you would go in there and
Divert
there's
to that.
setbacks, FAR, coverage, things like that.
But you have to hit 100% of those other things? I mean,
Yeah, I don't, there's a little subjectivity in here.
Okay.
What is feasible, right? Last week when we talked about the variance, it was considered infeasible to give up your backyard space, so therefore we allowed a second-story addition, right? But you could, with that same applicant, come in here and say, well, it's not, I want a backyard, therefore I need to put the ADU upstairs, above the height limit.
But they're not going to come here.
Yeah.
right, that's just, I was just gonna say,
They're going to go
coming
to
here.
staff.
They're going to staff for
But
that.
again, we've tried to build in development standards that like reduced setback in cases if your lot is too skinny, right? Or it's too shallow. You have a reduction in your rear setback. The idea being that the state law says you get to 800 square foot units. And that's what it's referencing. If you can't fit 200 square foot units on your lot with reducing setbacks and other things, then you can increase your height of your underlying zone. In most cases, we're already at 2 stories, and so that's 400 square feet, 2 stories tall, two-story buildings, so maybe. So that's the smallest lot you can do an urban lot split on is 1,200 square feet. So I was playing with numbers.
It makes sense to me. I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure I was reading it right, because
Okay.
I was reading it like, yeah, you could exceed the height limit if you needed to.
Right, so
If
you can
show that
exceed,
you've already looked at coverage
Yeah.
and setback and da-da-da-da-da-da-da,
because we have to allow the 800 square feet.
that makes sense.
Based on the conversation, I felt that height was the one that was the stickler.
Yes, I would agree with that.
All right, so I'm pretty new to this whole process. So the reality is, why not 24 feet? Why not 36 feet? Where are we arbitrarily putting a height limit in when someone in the future could come in and say, well, I need to make mine 3 stories to make it fit? And it's still 800 square feet. Am I going down the wrong rabbit hole here? I'm just,
You might be, because I
Okay.
feel like the underlying zone, there's established height limits in this Encinitas, right? 22 feet and 4 feet for additional for pitched roofs and things like that. I think we're talking about deviating from height, but not from number of stories, right?
Correct.
Right, so then I think to me, that's a big big distinction, that no one's gonna come in a 3rd story.
But if I make my slab to slab 15 feet, then I'm only at 2 stories, but I'm at 30
Yeah.
feet high.
Yeah, maybe
And
there's,
you could put mezzanines in there so
Right.
that,
well, maybe
I'm just wondering
it's-
what the trigger is and what's reasonable, what we can hold them to without them coming back and saying that's not reasonable, and they can,
I think underlying zone is 22 and 26, isn't it?
Yes.
They're not going any taller than that. Nobody
I
is.
think that the 16 feet was because historically, there were some problems with people building higher than that over garages, and it created problems with people glamping and stuff like that. So that is why they decided 16 feet is sufficient to reduce the abuses of the code.
And I don't have it in front of me, but isn't that also the height for accessory units? Not accessory dwelling units, but if you're going to build a,
To be clear, though, we're talking about 16 feet if you're using a reduced setback. If you are meeting all the setbacks, you have the 22 and 24-foot or 26-foot height limits, correct? You bring up a good point, Bob, is if someone just said, I need 14-foot ceilings on the 1st and 2nd floor, now they're up to 28, and they put a pitched roof on it, they're up to 36. I would argue, or I don't know, maybe staff would have to argue, you're already, you're trying to deviate as little as possible from the underlying zone. And we face this all the time, trying to make a case to discretionary bodies that a 9-foot ceiling is standard, you know, like 8 foot is unreasonable now or something. But, you know, in this jurisdiction or others, you know, you start to hit, you know, if you had a 10-foot ceiling, someone's going to come in and say, you know, you could reduce that. But I agree, there's no, you know, that's a discussion that happens between the staff and the applicant, not us, right?
And I think the other is that when we were talking about it, it's increasing the 16 to the base at 22, 24, and then if anything above that. So in some cases, they may say, well, to get my square footage, I need to get 2 stories, and 16 feet's not going to get me that 2 stories, potentially, unless you did a, no, I don't even think it would work there. Because like you said, the plate height and everything, there may be, we could probably potentially add something about plate heights, but I don't, again, going back to what we've talked about before, is we don't want to create standards that we don't have for standards of development, regardless of SB 9. So you know, you always hope that people will be reasonable and not try to push limits, but they do.
They will, I'm sure. I think the one caveat the staff has is that if you're talking about square feet, you're talking about the horizontal dimensions of something, which is unrelated to height. So it'd be hard for them to demonstrate that the extra ceiling height
It's going to give them.
somehow alleviated the horizontal compression of the site, right?
Right, and given your experience, I'm like, could someone make a tall, skinny, 3-story?
Well, they couldn't do a 3-story. They have to do 2.
You have to do 2. Okay, so tall,
This
skinny.
only applies in the reduced setback area, though. And I think this is also not just privacy, but also solar. You don't want to block someone's sunlight.
I just don't want them using 10-foot slab to slabs and going tall and skinny and saying, I can't meet, I have to get my 800 square feet.
I see what you're saying, but I think it's actually a difficult
Okay, I'll trust you, and that's what you do, so.
something to do. I mean, you know, the taller you make it, the longer your stairs are, and if you're already talking about a compressed, tight site, you can't have a longer stair, you know, so I think there's going to be a natural limit to
All right.
what people could request.
There are a few things that I want to make sure, so I heard the 22, 26. There are some zones that allow for the 26, 30. So I just want to make sure that is known. And then I'm not sure if all of the commission knows that the ADU law, there's the relief of setbacks. And then in order to get the 2 800 square foot ADUs, you are able to exceed lot coverage and floor area ratio. So that's the other 2 standards. So staff would first look at maximizing that before height is looked at. So that's the way I just want to explain how staff would interpret it. But yeah, so I just want to make sure that you were aware of those points.
And this would pretty much only apply to very tiny lots. Is that correct? I mean, it would, this was
Of when it would,
I think the point about lot coverage in FAR is excellent, right? You'd have to show that you've literally maxed out the entire coverage, the entire FAR, and you still couldn't fit the 800 square foot thing. And then you're going to deviate from the height, but it still has to only be a 2-story thing, you know?
So there's other caveats
Yeah.
to keep it down.
Yeah. And if the underlying zone is a higher height limit, then it's already been predetermined that we think taller buildings are okay in that space, yeah.
Yep, I'm good
Item
with it.
5, it says impervious coverage shall not exceed 75% of the gross lot area. What would it be if the lot were not split up? Isn't it something smaller than 75%? Because that only leaves 25% per plants.
Not sure I followed that question, Susan.
Under lot coverage, number 5,
Uh-huh. I'm looking at it, I
With-
just didn't, could you rephrase the question, because I don't think I understood what you were asking.
I'm wondering if we're looking at a typical single-family lot, what is the impervious coverage percent allowed? I mean, still 75%? I don't think so.
Let's see, there's landscaping requirements that would apply to certain lots, but I believe that, and then the other factor is that stormwater requirements are triggered. So I believe, Jennifer, this one was placed in there to ensure that 75% is not exceeded, so that this does not exist within our code today. It has been added.
So if it's R1 or R5 or R8, R11, whatever zone, any of those can be subdivided with SB 9. What is the maximum impervious coverage for those residential zones
It would just be the lot.
right now?
It would just be whatever the lot coverage is for those individual zones.
But even lot coverage is only for some things. It's not, so driveways, things like that aren't included in lot coverage.
Correct.
And so this was a way to answer the request that you all had in regards to when we have these situations where that lot coverage is exceeded, how do we ensure that the entire lot is now not covered in a pervious surface? And so this was the way to allow creativity for driveways or, sidewalks that still meet building code standards that they may have applicable. It's just an attempt. It was an attempt at getting there. I will allow all kinds of comments on this one. This was just me throwing something out there for discussion.
I like it, and I think Commissioner Sherrod was basically saying,
I think that what we really want to see here is that we want to have a requirement for pervious coverage and natural or native plant coverage, or something that rather than leaving it as impervious coverage shall not exceed 75% sort of means to me, let's see how much hardscape we can get up to 75%, and then they're going to go for that 75%. Rather than wording it that way, I would like to see it worded in a way that delimits the pervious coverage and the plant coverage.
Well, we could just turn this on its head and say at least 25% of the gross lot area shall be pervious materials, or however you want to
or
phrase it.
more.
Well, yeah,
Or
but we're
plant
talking about a
material.
lot that's like 1,200 square feet.
Is this whole thing a little problematic, though?
Very much.
You're already saying they comply with, they build up to the lot coverage allowed, and then they still you have to allow them to build the two 800 square foot ADUs. I mean, so even if the ADUs came in and just in there and the building footprint exceeded 75%, you couldn't deny it.
Correct. So this is where I was going with the first part of that sentence was on parcels where the proposed 2-unit, I could say that the remaining lot, but on the parcels where the proposed 2-unit development exceeds the maximum lot coverage to allow the minimum 2 800 square feet residential units, then the impervious coverage shall not exceed. So I meant to say like the remaining, but the reason why it was, I recognize that after putting on 2 homes, I still need, people want a deck or they want other surfaces that are hard, right? I want to put my barbecue outside. I need something hard to put that on or, those types of things. But there are other ways to do decorative pavers with, those other options. And that's where I was going with trying to allow creativity without saying it has to be a landscaped area or it has to be this, because I recognize that we don't have this requirement for impervious, but we also don't allow developments to exceed lot coverage. So
To me, the critical thing, you just said it was the remaining lot area, right? Because in this, I thought the 75 would be a moot point if you could just demonstrate that your ADUs required more. But you're saying after you've done the units and the ADUs, the remaining lots area, 75%.
So
max.
just instead of gross lot area, we would say the remaining lot area. Is that,
I think if you added that word remaining somewhere in there, that would help.
And I would argue, like, hey, if the remaining space, this goes back to stormwater runoff, this is an issue that the county, the city has to deal with. And so if you make it just one solid slab, we're just gonna have massive amounts of stormwater runoff.
But that's regulated. They couldn't do, they already have a engineering requirement, right, to show stormwater
But
treatment.
you can suggest in code to have pervious, this is brand new development, so why not make it, your driveway doesn't have to be hardscape, doesn't have to be concrete, it can be pervious driveways where the water soaks into rather than run off into the streets. So I'm saying if to your point, what's left over, we're saying you only have to put 25% greenscape or 25% pervious. I'm like, okay, really? You can still do pavers underneath your barbecue, and that's pervious. So I think all you're doing here is just making this massive concrete slab with water and crud running off.
to be fair, though, this massive concrete slab is going to be the smallest lot in Encinitas.
No, but I think that you were looking
Because it's
at,
the only way these conditions can apply.
So Bob, you're suggesting a different number than 75. You're saying a different number.
yes, I think net is a different number than 75, because if you allow them up to 75%, they'll just pave it over. And I don't think that is good. I think somehow making it a lower number, making it more pervious would be great. Keeping the water on site, yes, if there's stormwater runoff, that's the point. We're allowing larger areas here, we're allowing greater density, more cars, assuming they're gonna park these cars. I guess what I'm saying is I'm concerned about the runoff, and I would like to have more areas that's left over to soak into the water, soak into the ground, rather than running into this.
I'm open to a different number if that's.
I don't know what that number is.
I've dealt with enough engineers and been
Yeah.
denied things I want to do because they can't get the site to percolate, right? I mean,
Right.
That aspect of the runoff is already regulated through the engineering department.
In my frame of mind, when I pass a street and I see concrete, I just think, oh, wow, and I'm thinking about that water runoff. But when I see a Grasscrete driveway, I'm like, wow, they actually did something good with that driveway. And I think we could say that we want to see all driveways be pervious paving. Because if there's so much lot coverage, we're already saying this doesn't exist in our current code. You're already saying it is a high number that we're having 75% of the gross area be coverage. So why not mandate that the driveways all are pervious paving? Because we can do that, and we can make it a little better. We can do better.
I'd be opposed to mandating a certain specific driveway. I'm open to talking about what the level of pervious and impervious is, but I do think you need to provide flexibility to homeowners down the road.
Although the corollary to that is we require low flush toilets. We require a certain amount of other eco-friendly building standards in our codes. So, there are places in cities where they're putting green roofs on to capture the rainwater so it doesn't, in New York City and Chicago, so it doesn't run off. That's the whole point. And that's what we can do as a governing body, is to make sure that we stay ahead of things, EV stations, and we're already electrifying our city. Not everybody agrees with electrification, but that is the code. So I don't see why putting a percolating driveway is any different than saying you can't put natural gas in.
So I have a comment, though, because, this is going to be the smallest lots in the city. And so if we say you can only use impervious, we're putting a condition on only these very small lots that have had to exceed the maximum lot coverage in order to get the two 800 square feet residential units. So I don't know that it's fair to put that burden only on this particular group.
Because, yeah, I'm thinking like these tiny little lots. I mean, what's the most we're gonna get, 65% lot coverage? Maybe on a couple of the R20s. 50 is more common. I remember we went through this with Brett Farrow and I when we were looking at exceptional design, got an extra 10% lot coverage, and we realized it's like nobody's building anything that doesn't have exceptional design. So it was too loosey-goosey. So, I mean, it makes most sense that if they're exceeding the maximum lot coverage, we should be trying to condition the remaining lot that's not built on and work on that, because otherwise we've got maximum lot coverage and 75% of gross lot area. We're basically the same thing.
So my thought process here is, if you took a 1 acre site and we've done the lot split and now we have 8 units on it, we've really covered the site. And you can say individually 800 units, 800. By the time you do it, you've taken a 1 acre house with a 3,000 square foot footprint on it, and you've taken that and now basically paved over the entire 1 acres. That requires us to compensate the natural environment a little bit better than just, I get the housing thing, but all of a sudden we've gone.
But that could never happen with this number 5 here, because this will only take effect where you need to exceed the maximum lot coverage in order to build 2 800 square foot homes. 1,600 square feet. It's not gonna happen on a 1 acre lot, because you will almost certainly be able to build 2 800 square foot units there. You know, because there's 43,560, I think. There's a bunch of. So this is, we dove into this deeply the last couple of times, where we got really into these minuscule lots, and what happens if people take that minuscule lot and they're gonna split it, and then they're gonna, from that split, they're gonna build 2 duplexes, each with ADUs, and Jennifer came up with a whole bunch of, like, kind of gamed it out to see just how could people do that, and quite often it was like you couldn't really, or if you did, you were pretty much filling it up to the brim. I still think the impervious coverage not exceeding 75% of the gross lot area, I think we should address the remaining area, because otherwise we're gonna have people, they're already using their 75. And does that mean that everything?
We could see green roofs, for example, to help reduce some of the problem of covering it up so much. But
I'm sorry,
we
can we
won't
take a
see
break?
it unless we write it into this.
Right,
We
but
won't see pervious pavement
I could do this job
unless
for the next 30
we write
years
it
and
into
never
this.
see one of these cases, because this is really, I can picture maybe a couple of little lots in Cardiff that might somehow do this, but it's, you know,
Could I make a motion that we take a 10-minute recess and then?
I was going to say that, thank you, because I
Thank
was
you, Steve.
hoping we'd get past this to number 7, but yes, I think we will, it's 8:20, and I think we should take a 10-minute recess. We'll rejoin here at 8:30. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. See you all at 8:30.
coverage shall not exceed X% of the remaining lot area?
Yeah, how about like 25%? I plucked that number out of the air.
I think there was a desire to express it in the amount of pervious space rather than the amount of impervious space. So,
Shall
And-
not.
and then I'm in agreement that clarifying that it's the remaining lot area that we're talking about, not the gross lot area, which might be considered like the entire site.
So the pervious coverage shall be at least 25%?
Yes.
But what about
Or
the
75.
green? Shouldn't it be divided into, I mean, even for commercial, we have a 15% pervious, right?
And we're offering, or we're listing 25% here.
That's what so the pervious coverage shall be at least 25% of the remaining lot area? Is that what I'm hearing?
Or actually, I think I said 25 when we were talking about impervious. So I think we want the bulk of the remaining lot area to be pervious.
Thank you, that's.
So we're inverting it completely, they were saying the impervious, we went from impervious being up to 75% of it, now we're saying the pervious space has to be 75%.
Well, because I said the impervious should, I floated
Impervious would be your
25%.
hardscape, your sidewalk, your driveway,
Yeah.
patio. So why can't we have a higher percentage than 25? Because we're saying that 75% includes the driveway and the sidewalk and the patio. So that means that if the driveway were pervious, we could up that percentage maybe at least 80%, and maybe at least out of that, because I don't know. But I think instead of 25% left over, maybe 30%, is left over, as we look at it, because if the driveway's pervious paving, like grasscrete, that helps me feel a lot better about the runoff and the drainage. So, but I do think some portion of it, I mean, can we have at least one tree, please, or, one shrub? I mean,
landscape is mentioned
why would
elsewhere.
we have
I think
a
there's-
wording of
there are-
only impervious?
No, but we changed it to pervious.
Actually, it's, Commissioner Dalton and Doyle have increased it threefold. So it's now,
Don't tell me I didn't.
So, yeah.
I
so-
mean, could we have 15% should be pervious and 10% should be green landscaping, at least if we're going to
I think,
split it up
we're
that way? I
overthinking
don't,
this.
some
We're saying that-
definition so that we get something green on that lot. I mean, I can't believe that we would want it to be all hardscape or,
So number 13, landscaping, there's already a landscaping provision, so this is solely related to the hardscape. So if you look at 13A, which is further down on page 12, so I think
Susan,
that may
as it
resolve your
stands right
concerns.
now, the suggestion is 75% pervious space out there. Right, significantly more than what it was before. And I would agree that we would handle landscaping items in a different section.
it looks a lot better than it did, in my opinion. Thank you very much for that suggestion.
I'm ready to move on.
I think I could deal with this. I think we've expanded this, and we'll get to landscape in a minute. Is there anything with the unit configuration? I thought that was a really interesting section. I didn't have anything I needed to address, I just liked it.
I had a question on item 11 on page 12.
Access to a public street?
Yeah. Every dwelling unit shall face or have frontage upon a public street or permanent means of access. I think the intent is to say has access to rather than frontage, right? We're not saying that all lots have to be split so that they have a front, a property on fronting the street, right? We'd allow a panhandle or a flag
Yeah.
lot.
And ADUs will be behind houses quite often?
Yeah,
I think it's a semantics issue with the ors and the way you read it.
Yeah, maybe, seems like primary unit.
Do you see what I'm saying?
yeah, so,
Maybe.
but if you have a flag lot, your unit in the back can't face the
Right,
street.
no, but I think it's like, I think it's a grammar kind of issue, and then it can be read two different ways without any because there's no commas.
Mhm.
So I think that we could use a similar sentence, because I think what it's saying is you either have to face the street or have frontage or have access.
Yes.
Right, so the comma.
So I think it's just I think the sentence needs just to be tweaked.
So we've got a lot of ors here.
Right.
I have a lot of ors.
Okay.
So it's
I-
either,
you're stating my concern, I guess, appropriately. I just think the orientation of the building should be free to be whatever it wants, but all lots have to have access to the public right-of-way.
I think that's what Jennifer intended. I think it's just the way the sentence is constructed.
the third or is that it could have permanent means of access to a public street. Doesn't have to have frontage, doesn't have to face, as long as it does one of those first three things.
You could
in that
probably put a
first
comma
sentence.
before the second or.
I
Oh, yes, she did.
I just did. When you were saying that, I was like, comma.
I agree about the access to a public way or street. You know, I would say a public way or street, because that makes it a little more flexible, but not face it.
Yeah, access is enough.
My next comment's on item 14.
Oh, wait. So shall be provided by can we just say driveway? So paved requires someone to do a paved driveway, but if we just put the word driveway, then that gives the property owner flexibility to create different kinds of driveways. The word paved.
Well, do
Right.
you want to allow a dirt driveway?
I think the city has an issue with people tracking
It's pervious.
debris or dirt off their property onto the street. If it was a,
But dirt driveways, if that's the case, if they're not allowed, then they're not allowed. So I'm just saying, the next,
I actually would support just striking paved and saying driveway. Is that what you're saying?
yes, I'm just saying, yeah. So
But
yeah, give your clients flexibility to come be creative with their driveway. And if the rules are you can't do dirt, well, then that's not an option.
Right, and it's got to comply with minimum width slope materials and other standards, so
Yeah.
probably a dirt driveway would not qualify.
Maybe a paved access way, because if they're located close to transit, they're not required to have a driveway, because they don't have to have parking if they're close to transit.
Well, just
Within a half
when
mile.
parking is required.
When automobile parking is required, it should have a driveway, right? We don't want to be driving across the lawns. and-
No parking is required if parcel is located within 1/2 mile walking distance of blah, blah. So some might not have parking at all.
So-
I think we're confusing two different sections. This one is saying when you have automobile parking, this is the conditions that dictate the driveway.
Oh, when?
Yeah, in a separate section, it says if you live within 1/2 mile, you can walk and you can use public transit.
Okay, I'm good.
Do we want to strike the face or frontage on a public street? The only reason why I put that in there is when we do have frontage on a street, typically the homes face the street, right?
I think that's I don't think that's important in my mind.
Well, I think we wanted it to say, every dwelling unit shall have permanent means of access to a public way or street.
And that's what I just wanted to,
But we do, and many other developments insist that, yes, they face the street. I mean, am I mistaken there?
But I think you're dictating a condition that may not be desirable or
But
achievable. if
They
you-
could say, no, I'm not going to do that, but I am providing permanent means of access to that public street, and therefore they would be okay.
Yeah, good for them.
Well, and there are residences and, like, in my neighborhood, there is, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 units, but you have the street and then a long driveway, and the front unit is the side of the
Yeah.
first unit, it's not the front. But it's got frontage, but it doesn't face.
Or if
Right.
you think about the second or third, they don't face the street.
Right.
They face the side driveway that they come, you come up.
All of them do
Yeah.
in that particular.
I would
instance.
be okay with striking it. It doesn't, I see its intent, and I think I would be perfectly happy leaving it in place, but if there's objections, I'm not going to fight for it.
There is a provision, I believe it's in the North 101 corridor specific plan, that says if the front of your home is not facing a public street, that you shall design it as it appears to be to Commissioner
really?
Ryan's point. There is a provision like that that exists so that you're not looking at the side of a house when you're driving on a public road.
The designer in me does not like that. Let's make a fake front of a house. Let's put columns in there too, just in case.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's an either-or situation. I see no harm leaving it there. I think most people will have things facing that way. You know, the flag lot, I'm thinking of some of the houses or apartments near where Chris is talking about, where, you know, it's a long driveway-ish, road-ish thing with houses that none of them are really facing towards the road. The road is superfluous. But they all have access, and they would all apply if you were to do something like this.
well, we can keep it in, provide that flexibility.
Is the intent of this particular section to apply to the lot as opposed to the units? Because state law expressly talks about how we can require lots to have access, but state law doesn't refer to how we need to require every unit to have access to the street. I think it's implicit, but I think maybe that was the intent.
No, it was a unit for me personally.
To me, it's that the lot should have access. When it says every dwelling unit, if you're talking about 3 or potentially 4 dwelling units lined
Yeah.
up along a driveway, there's no way that every one of them can face the front street.
Agreed. That's why I added the comma for the or. But the permanent means of access to the public street is the law for the lots. And I was just specifically referencing units. But I'm totally fine just saying everybody needs access. If we want to just strike it.
Or you could say every dwelling unit shall have permanent means of access to a public street and call it good. And then the condition about automobile parking remains.
You could look at it in terms of the parcel, you know, that they should have each parcel, you know,
Well,
would have
but there's the
access.
ADUs, they're not all parcels. They're all, the dwelling units all have to, and honestly, people are unlikely to build houses that don't have a means of access to a public street. But as we discussed earlier, people can do foolish things if they choose.
If you say public way or street, you can be more flexible
But
in
like-
covering a sidewalk as a public way.
Wouldn't we have to define public way?
You know,
What is a
or
public
even
way?
a pathway could be a way,
I think we're overcomplicating it.
and a driveway is still considered an access way, a way or driveway.
still, eventually you got to get to a public street. And this allows that. And you can follow a pathway, you can follow all sorts of, take an alley. I have nothing more on number 11.
I don't either.
Now, number 13, landscaping, I know was discussed. I don't know if,
13B may potentially conflict with what you just did.
yep, almost
We haven't
certainly.
voted on anything yet, so let's just
Yeah.
make B complicit, or, compliant with whatever we had before, and then we can always look at it again.
I like it. I like 13B a lot.
But,
Limit that
It's less than what you
pervious
just got.
coverage
but we just did number 5 with lot
and
coverage.
setbacks.
So front and side yard setbacks, you can't have any structures in those areas anyway. So I think maybe Jennifer, you can clarify.
It would be like sidewalks and things like that would need to be pervious. That's what it's getting at.
Without going down the same, I think we just try to make it as consistent with what we had above. and
I'll
we'll
do
review
some
it from there at the next draft.
sketching, figure out what that number is.
What, in number 5, we were toggling between 25 and 75, right?
She'll figure that out.
Oh, then that's great. Let's not micromanage that. Let's leave this to our professional.
I have a question on 14B when it says the upper story unenclosed landings, decks, and balconies that do not face or overlook an adjoining property. Don't all properties adjoin some other property? I mean, is there ever a condition where we wouldn't adjoin a property?
It says due to orientation or topography, so sometimes we face a hillside.
So
That
you're
may
just
have a lot
really
line or-
describing an exception to item A above it, saying if you are in a unique situation where you don't have a neighbor,
Right.
you overlook the
If you
lagoon
basically
or
don't
the
look at
beach.
anybody
Yeah.
because of
Okay.
a hillside or because of the way that
A
you're
lot of
oriented.
New Encinitas homes are like that, where the backyard is basically a
A hill.
70-degree slope going up to where the next pads are. So I would think there, you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Okay, I understand that. In item 15, maybe there's a word or a spelling, in the second line, it says, well, each primary unit shall include a minimum of 100 square feet of private exterior open space dwelling unit?
Per dwelling?
D? Oh, okay, I gotta look at the right screen then. Nothing further.
Utilities. I didn't spend much time going over the permits. I assumed that staff was better qualified. Okay, and page, where we are, okay, you're already working on, thank you very much.
I have a quick question on the, who makes sure that there's a deed restriction in the process? So if we're.
Bob, I'm going to ask you to make sure your mic's a little closer to your
I'm
mouth.
sorry, I was thinking quietly. In the process of approving the permits and the deed restrictions, does the deed restriction have to be shown as part of the permit process? It does?
It's usually a condition, you're trying to pull your permit, and they say,
Right.
well, do you have this, do you have that, do you have
Okay.
that? Have you done the, so it's just one more.
One more, I haven't done
checklist
that,
item.
so, okay, that's how it works. Thank you.
Is the affidavit, David, and on page 14, is that required by state law, or is that something that we've added as a city?
That's state law that we require that affidavit for the owner, and that being their primary residence for 3 years. But it does specifically say that it can only be an affidavit. That cannot actually be a deed restriction.
And am I correct that this is applying to only urban lot splits, but if you did not do an urban lot split, this is not
There's no
required?
owner occupancy requirements.
Okay, thanks.
And then the denial is all what's in the government, the state law.
Uncle, I'm done.
I have no more pages to look at here, Jennifer.
All right, that means next time we just,
Yeah? So question for you, Jennifer, is do you feel you have everything you need here?
I do.
And does anyone here on the commission have anything else to add?
I'd just like to thank Jennifer. I know you kind of get the brunt of the discussion that happens up here and maybe differing of opinions, and they're directed at you, and I think you're doing a great job of it, and I appreciate the efforts that you've done to pull it this far, and look forward to seeing the final product.
No problem.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Like, one of the most important things we can do is get involved with, making an actual ordinance happen. There's where we become lawmakers, or at least contributing to the lawmakers. Well, then I am going to, let's see, are we actually
Can
done with this case?
I need you to continue it to October the 6th, please.
October 6th?
So I need you to make a motion to continue.
I'll make a motion that we continue this case till October 6th.
I will second that.
Second.
All right, I think Bob beat you to that one, Susan.
So assuming that motion gets adopted, it would, the hearing would be continued to October 6th, the next regular planning commission meeting.
Correct.
If I had a jacket, I'd go hang it over that timer thing there. Oh. I see we have a unanimous vote here. All 5 commissioners have voted yes. This item is continued to our next regular planning commission of October 6th. And we'll look forward to seeing you again, Jennifer. We'll be almost done then, right? Far out. So, thank you very much. I'm going to move forward with the agenda. Do we have any future items added by the planning commission? Anyone have anything they want to, do we have any planning commission reports? Yeah, Susan?
The El Camino Real Task Force met again Tuesday, and it was a discussion about the scoping meeting for the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report, and it was adding information that we thought might be missing from the CEQA list of topics that are normally included. And I added prevailing breezes should be reviewed because depending on how things are built up on that corridor, it could block the ocean breeze that comes, some people don't have AC. And then I also added about solar and a few other things were added. Our next meeting is going to be on a Saturday morning, and we're going to be on the street at El Camino Real. Okay.
That'll be interesting. We've done it before. We kicked off this meeting years ago with Eric Burden, the walkability expert, not the animals. Yes, different Eric Burden. Yeah, I know. I got you. But we walked the entire El Camino. We started from Bank of America, and we walked all the way up to the end of Encinitas, and then we took a little bus back. I actually was foolish enough to walk back from there to get to my car, and it's a really painful walk. There's not a lot of shade. People look at you funny because, what's wrong with you? And yeah, it's going to be exciting. I think the next meeting is going to be a good one. I'm unfortunately not going to be there, but prior engagements. Anyone else? If not, I'll ask Anna Calamusi. Do we have a secretary's report?
Yes, we have the draft EIR public scoping meeting for the mobility element on September 19th here at City Hall from 5 to 7 p.m. And then the other item is that the Clark Housing Apartment Project was heard by City Council yesterday evening, where they considered both appeals, and they denied the appeal from CDAG and approved the appeal from Western National, who was the applicant, and they did overturn the decision of the Planning Commission to deny the project. Therefore, the Clark Avenue project housing element site was approved yesterday evening. And so one of the things that I did want to ask the commission is that, given that I think there's been 3 housing element site projects that were denied by Planning Commission and overturned by City Council, maybe I would offer an informational item in which we can return and provide some information on the by right housing laws, that might be useful, or something similar that may be helpful to you all. I'm open to suggestions, and with the goal of, basing those kind of housing projects on like factual decisions and, equipping the council with factual information when projects get appealed. So I just wanted to offer that and see if that would be an informational item and that the commission would want.
Can you tell me which of the 3?
I'm sorry?
Which 3 were overturned? I know Clark.
Yes, so there was the Clark and then the Vulcan housing element site, the 1967 Vulcan. And then the third one was the Goodson, thank you.
Okay.
That one was more unique.
Right, that one was taken directly back to City Council.
Correct.
After they
Settlement agreement.
right.
Correct.
That one was different.
Right, well, that one was actually, the denial of Planning Commission was actually upheld.
It was.
That is correct.
So too.
Yeah.
Yes, and then eventually overturned through settlement agreement. So that is a good clarification, yes.
Certainly, by right is one of the most confusing aspects of this whole thing, and it's, if we, take every developer at face value, it's like by right is like everything. That just means shut up and do what we say, which it doesn't. Sometimes it could mean that, and sometimes it's not. And it's, I'm sure I'm not alone. I know most of the public is like, but what the, so certainly an informational meeting, something that we could perhaps publicize where we could ask questions and get clarifications in a manner where the public could actually hear this too. And it'd be best if that could be publicized in such a way so that people knew this is, the reason we're talking about this is because of these housing element sites, many of which are listed as by right, And if you want to know what you're talking about when they come in front of us, you should attend this meeting. So I don't know if we, what kind of outreach we can do or you can do, but I think that would be an awesome thing.
Okay.
And anything else?
So it's just the by right stuff. Anything else that comes up, please let
It's
me know.
just-
Yeah.
We barely understand it, and we should understand it better than anyone.
Okay.
So there's always been,
It seems like the last one that was the subdivision act, that the lot line adjustments was a big part of the
Yeah.
last one, and that might help clarify part of what you clarify for us.
Okay. So a subdivision map act informational one as well? Is that what I heard?
I would focus on the lot line adjustments that are by right,
Understood.
ministerial lot line adjustments. How many lot lines can you move without triggering the map act?
Okay. Yeah.
And I'd like to be practical and bring the housing element up on a slide and point out which parcels are included in the housing element that are claiming by right. So if it's the Quail Garden site, so people actually know specifically what sites that we're talking about. I think that would be a way to reinforce the knowledge that this is what
Yeah.
the community's going to be seeing.
When the project comes forward, you mean? Sorry, I just want to be
or
clear.
no, during this,
During this.
Oh, the informational
presentation-
one, which ones are applying by right? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a
they're,
great suggestion.
they're by right because of the housing element and because the city has incorporated them into the housing element is why these sites are coming before the various commissions.
I like that.
Great, thank you so much.
Cool, we'll watch our agendas for that, and you'll
Yes.
tell us when you're ready.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Are we,
That's all I have.
we are at the final item on my page here, which is adjournment. And we will be adjourning to the next regular planning commission meeting on October 6th. And Jennifer, we'll see you again. We'll look forward to this. Thank you, everyone. Oh,